The afternoon sun in Southern California had a unique quality, a kind of molten gold that bleached the sky and made hard surfaces shimmer. It was the kind of light that made things look expensive, and nowhere was that more true than at the monolithic headquarters of Prestige Automotive Group. The dealership wasn't just a building, it was a statement. A vast temple of glass and brushed steel, it sat on its corner lot like a landed spacecraft, its windows reflecting the endless parade of luxury vehicles that whispered past on the boulevard. Inside, beneath architectural lighting that mimicked a perfect cloudy day, rested millions of dollars of machinery. Each car was a predator, sleek and silent on the polished concrete floor, its paintwork so deep you could drown in it. The air itself was curated, carrying the faint, intoxicating perfume of German leather, Italian wax, and old money. This was a place built to quietly intimidate, to remind anyone who entered that they were stepping into a world where desire had a very specific, and very high, price tag. So when the dusty, 10-year-old domestic SUV with a faded bumper sticker pulled not into the pristine customer lot but into an unmarked staff spot near the back, it was an act of quiet rebellion. The driver's door opened, and a pair of worn sneakers hit the pavement, followed by the lanky frame of a man who seemed entirely at odds with his surroundings. Snoop Dogg, or rather, the anonymous figure he chose to be today, straightened his simple gray hoodie and surveyed the empire he had quietly acquired just 3 weeks prior. He hadn't come for an inspection. He hadn't come to announce himself. He'd come for a diagnosis. He wanted to feel the pulse of this place, to understand the culture that existed when the new boss wasn't in the room. He believed that a company's true character wasn't in its mission statement, but in how it treated a nobody. He pushed through the heavy glass doors and the carefully constructed atmosphere washed over him. The gentle hum of the climate control, the impossibly soft classical music drifting from hidden speakers, the reverent silence of the showroom floor. A few sales associates, men and women in razor-sharp suits, were clustered near a coffee bar, their laughter low and controlled. As Snoop ambled in, their conversation didn't stop, but it changed. The energy shifted, tightening with the silent, professional appraisal reserved for unqualified buyers. Eyes flicked down to his sneakers, up to his hood, and then away, dismissing him in a fraction of a second. A young salesman, barely out of his 20s with a fresh haircut and an eager glint in his eye, broke from the group, a practiced smile already forming. "Welcome to Prestige, sir. Is there anything I can help you find today?" Before Snoop could answer, a crisp, commanding voice cut through the air. "I'll handle this, Leo." Caroline Vance, the dealership's general manager, emerged from her glass-walled office like a shark gliding through water. She was a woman in her late 40s, immaculately tailored in a severe navy blue pantsuit, her blonde hair pulled into a chignon so tight it seemed to pull her facial features taut. She carried a tablet like a shield, her expression one of strained, professional patience. She had just spent an hour on a conference call with corporate, being grilled over sales projections that were 3% below target for the quarter. She was not in the mood for time wasters. She gave the young salesman, Leo, a look that sent him retreating back to the coffee bar with a nervous nod. Her gaze then settled on Snoop, her smile a thin, bloodless line. "Good afternoon," she said, her tone as sterile as the showroom floor. "I am Caroline Vance, the general manager. Are you here for a specific model?" Snoop offered a relaxed, easy smile that didn't quite reach her. "Nah, nothing specific. Just lookin' to see what you got. See what feels right." He gestured vaguely at a menacing-looking black sports sedan. Caroline's eyes followed his gesture, and a flicker of something, annoyance, perhaps, crossed her face before being smoothed over. "Of course," she said. "However, our vehicles are typically available for viewing by appointment. It helps us dedicate the appropriate time to our serious clients." The emphasis on serious was subtle, but perfectly clear. Snoop's smile didn't waver. He simply slid his hands into his pockets and began to wander deeper into the showroom, his slow, unhurried pace a stark contrast to her coiled energy. "Oh, I'm serious," he said softly, more to himself than to her. "Probably more serious than you know." Caroline's polite facade began to crack, the fine lines of impatience showing around her eyes. She glanced at the other sales staff, who were now pretending not to watch the unfolding interaction. She saw this as a performance, a test of her authority to maintain the dealership's high standards. She took a steadying breath and followed him, her heels clicking an aggressive rhythm on the concrete. "Sir," she began, her voice a little firmer now. "Perhaps I could help narrow your search. What is your current vehicle?" Snoop paused beside a brilliant white convertible, running a finger gently over the cool metal of the fender before catching her eye. He seemed to be genuinely considering the question. "Something reliable," he answered, his gaze distant. "Something that gets me where I need to go." Her patience finally snapped, though her voice remained controlled, dripping with condescension. "I see. Well, while we appreciate your interest, Prestige Automotive Group caters to a very particular clientele. Our inventory begins in the low six figures. We don't have anything in the, shall we say, practical category. Perhaps I could recommend a very reputable certified pre-owned dealership just a few miles down the road. They have an excellent selection of reliable vehicles." She said the word reliable, as if it tasted foul. The moment hung in the air, thick with unspoken judgment. Snoop simply looked at her, his expression unreadable, letting her words settle in the silent, opulent space. Snoop let out a soft, low chuckle that seemed to be absorbed by the vast, silent showroom. It wasn't a sound of amusement, but of weary recognition. He met Caroline's gaze, his own eyes calm and steady, and for the first time, she felt a flicker of uncertainty. She was used to people being intimidated or defensive. This quiet composure was disarming. "That's a real specific recommendation," Snoop said, his voice smooth and even. "Tell me, Caroline, what is it you see that makes you think I belong a few miles down the road?" The use of her first name, spoken with such casual familiarity, struck a dissonant chord. It was a subtle shift in their dynamic, a quiet claim to an equal footing she had not offered him. She bristled, her professional mask tightening. "It's not a personal judgment, sir," she replied, the word "sir" now sounding more like an accusation. "It's a matter of efficiency. My team and I are trained to qualify potential clients to ensure we provide the best possible service. It's about managing expectations and respecting everyone's time, yours and ours." Snoop nodded slowly, as if she'd just revealed a profound business secret. "Qualify," he repeated, tasting the word. "So, what are the qualifications? Is it the shoes? Or the hoodie?" He wasn't being aggressive, his tone was one of genuine curiosity, which only seemed to frustrate her more. She saw it as him being deliberately obtuse, mocking her. "The qualification," she said, her voice sharp as broken glass, "is a verifiable interest and the financial capacity to make a purchase. We are not a public museum. The vehicles on this floor are reserved for discerning collectors and clientele. Now, if you are not prepared to discuss financing or a cash offer, I really must insist," he cut her off, not by speaking, but by simply turning away and walking toward a stunning, cherry-red Grand Tourer that sat under its own dedicated spotlight. He moved with a languid grace that seemed to defy her sense of urgency. He circled the car, his eyes taking in every line, every curve. "This is the V12, right?" he asked, his back still to her. "The twin-turbo? Heard they had some issues with the transmission lag on the downshift in the 2024 model. Did the engineers figure that out in this year's build?" Caroline froze mid-step. The question was specific, technical, and accurate. It was not the query of a man who wandered in off the street. It was the question of an enthusiast, someone who read the magazines and watched the reviews. It didn't fit her carefully constructed profile of him. "The transmission software was updated," she said stiffly. "The response is now seamless." He nodded, then tapped a finger near the massive carbon ceramic brake caliper, visible through the spokes of the wheel. "Good to know. And these rotors, they're standard now? Used to be part of a $15,000 performance package." From across the showroom, Leo watched, his mouth slightly agape. He exchanged a nervous glance with another salesman, who quickly looked away, not wanting to be drawn into the orbit of Caroline's escalating frustration. Leo felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. He knew his manager's moods, and he could see she was moving past irritation into outright anger. He wanted to do something, to walk over and de-escalate, but he knew that interfering would only make him a target. Caroline's thin smile was gone completely now. Yes. They are standard on the Grand Sport model. Her tone implied he should already know this. Snoop finally turned to face her fully, his expression thoughtful. That's a smart move. Makes the value proposition stronger. He paused, looking around the showroom again. You know, a place like this, it ain't just about selling cars. It's about selling a dream. But a dream's gotta feel welcoming, you know. It's gotta feel like maybe, just maybe, it could be your dream too. Even if you walk in wearing sneakers. This simple piece of philosophy was too much for Caroline. To her, it sounded like a lecture from someone who had no idea what it took to manage a high-pressure, multi-million-dollar operation. All she saw was her quarterly numbers slipping and a man in a hoodie wasting her precious time with pseudo-profound observations. Thank you for the business advice, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. However, my business is selling automobiles, not abstract concepts. The vehicles are meticulously detailed for our clients, so I must ask you to please refrain from touching them. The request was a clear escalation, a line being drawn in the sand. He was no longer a potential customer, not even a time waster. He was a contaminant. Snoop looked down at his own hand, then back at the flawless red paint of the car. He hadn't been disrespectful. He hadn't leaned or smudged. He barely made contact. He saw the move for what it was, an attempt to humiliate him, to put him back in the box she had created for him. He took a deliberate step back from the car, holding his hands up in a gesture of mock surrender. My apologies, he said, his voice still infuriatingly calm. Wouldn't want to mess up the dream. He then looked past her, his eyes scanning the other cars, until they landed on the dealership's crown jewel, a hypercar displayed on a raised platform in the center of the showroom. It was a limited edition model, one of only 50 in the world, with a price tag that could purchase a row of houses in most cities. He pointed a long finger toward it. All right. Let's stop playing around then. Tell me about that one. The silver one. The one that costs more than your whole sales team's annual salary. Let's start there. The statement landed in the silent showroom with the force of a physical blow. Pointing at the seven-figure hypercar was not just an inquiry, it was a declaration of war. For Caroline, it was the final, unforgivable insult. This man, this nobody in a hoodie, was not just wasting her time, he was openly mocking her, her staff, and the very institution she had spent years building her career upon. The last vestiges of her forced politeness evaporated, replaced by an icy, controlled rage. Her eyes narrowed into slits, and her voice, when she spoke, was low and dangerous. That vehicle, she said, articulating each syllable with precision, is not a vehicle. It is the apex. It is the centerpiece of our collection, and it is shown to qualified parties by executive invitation only. You do not have an invitation. Snoop rocked back on his heels, a slow, knowing smile touching his lips for the first time. It was a smile of satisfaction, the kind a chess player makes when he sees his opponent has walked directly into his trap. An invitation, he mused. So who sends out the invitations? The owner? Access is at the discretion of senior management, she snapped, taking a half-step closer. She was now physically asserting her authority, entering his personal space. And my discretion tells me this conversation is over. You have been amusing, but I have a business to run. Snoop's gaze drifted from her face to the wider showroom, noting the nervous, frozen expressions of her sales team. He saw Leo, who looked genuinely pained by the confrontation, and another, older salesman who simply stared at his shoes, clearly wanting no part of the impending explosion. He looked back at Caroline, and his own demeanor underwent a subtle but profound transformation. The laid-back, inquisitive persona fell away, replaced by something still and weighty. The quiet calm was still there, but now it felt less like relaxation and more like immense, restrained power. "You know, you've talked a lot about my qualifications, Caroline," he said, his voice dropping to a serious, resonant tone. "But I've been making my own evaluation here. An evaluation of you. Of this whole operation." She mistook his seriousness for a final act of defiance. Her mind, clouded by anger and prejudice, could only interpret his words in one way, as the insolence of a man who didn't know his place. "I don't know who you think you are, but I've had enough," she declared, her voice rising in volume, finally breaking her own rule of showroom decorum. "You have been asked to respect our property and our clientele, and you have failed to do either. I am now asking you to leave. Immediately." The words echoed in the cavernous space. This was it. The final move. She had played her last card. She stood there, arms crossed, expecting him to argue, to protest, perhaps to slink away in defeat. She was prepared for any of those reactions. She was not prepared for what he did next. Snoop did not move. He simply held her gaze for a long moment, a look of profound disappointment in his eyes. Then, slowly, he reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a simple, unadorned smartphone. "I think," he said softly, "that I need a second opinion on that." Caroline's face flushed with fury. "If you do not walk out that door in the next 10 seconds, I will have security escort you out. We can even involve the local police if you'd like to continue this." Without breaking eye contact, Snoop unlocked his phone and tapped a single name in his contacts. He lifted the phone to his ear. The silence in the room was absolute. Every employee was stock-still. The faint classical music seemed to have died away. The only sound was the almost imperceptible ringtone from Snoop's phone. Then, it stopped. "Yeah, it's me," Snoop said into the phone, his voice as casual as if he were ordering a pizza. He turned slightly away from Caroline, giving her his shoulder. "I'm down here. In the main showroom." No, everything's fine. I was just having a conversation with the general manager. A little misunderstanding about qualifications." He paused, listening. Caroline's heart began to hammer against her ribs. Who was he calling? The owner was a reclusive investor who never dealt with day-to-day operations. The regional director? He was in meetings all day. She felt a cold prickle of doubt, a tiny hairline crack in her certainty. She quickly suppressed it. He was bluffing. It was a desperate, pathetic attempt to save face. "Yeah," Snoop continued into the phone. "Could you do me a favor and come down here for a second? I think you should be a part of this conversation." "Great. See you in a minute." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He turned back to Caroline, his face a neutral mask. "Someone will be right down," he said. Caroline let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound devoid of any humor. "You are unbelievable. Truly. Who did you just call? The ghost of Enzo Ferrari?" "Someone with an invitation," Snoop replied simply. The next few minutes stretched into an eternity. Caroline stood her ground, determined not to back down, but the righteous anger that had fueled her was beginning to curdle into a strange, unfamiliar anxiety. She busied herself by straightening her blazer, checking her tablet for emails that she wasn't actually reading. It was a desperate attempt to project an aura of control she no longer felt. Snoop, by contrast, was an image of perfect stillness. He leaned casually against the fender of the red Grand Tourer, the very car she had forbidden him from touching, and waited. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at his phone. He just watched the main elevator bank at the far end of the showroom, his patience seemingly infinite. The soft, melodic chime of the elevator arriving was a sound Caroline had heard 1,000 times a day. It was background noise, insignificant. But in this moment, in the suffocating silence of the showroom, it sounded as loud and final as a gavel strike. The brushed steel doors slid open with a quiet hiss. Caroline's posture straightened, a smug, vindicated expression beginning to form on her face. She expected to see two uniformed security guards or, perhaps, the head of operations, Mark, who would swiftly and firmly handle this disruption. The figure that stepped out was neither. It was Arthur Sterling, the chief operating officer for all of North American acquisitions. A man so high up the corporate ladder that he barely seemed to inhabit the same reality as a dealership manager. He was in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and a bespoke suit that probably cost more than Leo's car. He was a legend in the industry, a titan known for his sharp mind and sharper tongue. Caroline had met him exactly twice in her career, both times at national conferences where she had been one of hundreds of managers vying for a moment of his attention. Her mind reeled. Why was he here? He never visited individual dealerships unannounced. A wave of cold dread, colder and more potent than her earlier anxiety, washed over her. She felt a sudden, visceral urge to smooth her blazer, to check her hair, to somehow make herself appear more professional, more in control. But Sterling didn't even glance in her direction. His eyes, a piercing shade of blue, scanned the showroom for a fraction of a second before landing on the man in the gray hoodie leaning against the red sports car. A remarkable thing happened to Arthur Sterling's face. The formidable, intimidating mask of the COO dissolved, replaced by a warm, genuine smile of deference and respect. He strode forward, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the polished floor, and extended his hand. "Mr. Broaddus," he said, his voice booming with a warmth that Caroline had never heard from him. "My sincerest apologies for the delay. I was on a call with the board in Germany. I hope Caroline here has been providing you with our 5-star welcome." The name, Broaddus, meant nothing to Caroline. Her brain, already struggling to process Sterling's presence, couldn't grasp the significance. But the tone of his voice, the sheer, unadulterated respect he was showing this man, sent her world tilting on its axis. Snoop, or rather Mr. Broaddus, pushed himself off the car and took Sterling's hand in a firm grip. "Arthur. Good to see you. And yeah, Caroline and I have been getting acquainted. She's been giving me a very thorough education on your client qualification process." There was no sarcasm in his voice, only a flat, factual statement that was somehow more damning than any insult. Sterling's smile faltered. He caught the undercurrent in Snoop's tone and finally turned his gaze upon his general manager. The warmth vanished, replaced by an icy disappointment that made Caroline feel as though the air had been sucked from her lungs. She opened her mouth to speak, to explain, to defend herself, but no words came out. A strangled, pathetic squeak was all she could manage. Her tablet, which she had been clutching like a life raft, slipped from her nerveless fingers and clattered onto the floor. The sound was obscenely loud in the quiet room. Sterling's eyes narrowed. "Caroline," he said, his voice now dangerously soft. "It seems you have not been properly introduced. This is Mr. Calvin Broaddus. He is the principal investor behind the consortium that finalized the acquisition of Prestige Automotive Group 3 weeks ago. He is, for all intents and purposes, your new boss. The owner." The final words detonated in the showroom. The owner. The owner. The words ricocheted through Caroline's skull, each echo a fresh wave of nausea. She stared at the man in the worn sneakers and faded hoodie, the man she had tried to send to a used car lot, the man she had threatened to have thrown out. And she saw him for the first time. The calm composure was not weakness, it was power. The casual clothes were not a sign of poverty, they were a sign of a man so far beyond her world that he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Her face, which had been flushed with anger, turned a ghostly, ashen white. The room began to spin. Around her, she could hear the collective, sharp intake of breath from her staff. Leo looked as though he had seen an apparition. The older salesman was now staring, his professional indifference completely gone. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a career-ending, life-altering cataclysm. Snoop let the silence hang for a moment longer, allowing the full weight of the situation to settle on every person in the room. Then, he took a step forward, his presence now commanding the space in a way no tailored suit ever could. He looked directly at Caroline, his expression not angry, but weary, like a teacher dealing with a student who had failed the simplest of tests. "You were very concerned about qualifications," he said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "Turns out, I own the qualifications. I am the invitation. And the first thing I'm learning about my new business is that the people running it don't recognize their own boss." He then turned to the horrified COO. "Arthur, I want you to gather every single employee in the main conference room. Sales, service, finance, janitorial. Everybody. Tell them it's a mandatory meeting with the new owner. It starts in 5 minutes." The main conference room at Prestige Automotive Group was a glass box on the second floor, overlooking the entire showroom. It was designed to give a feeling of command and oversight. Today, it felt like a fishbowl. 35 employees filed in, their movements stiff and silent. The sales team in their sharp suits, the finance managers with their tired eyes, the service technicians in their clean, branded jumpsuits, even the receptionists and janitorial staff. They took their seats around the long, polished mahogany table, avoiding eye contact with each other, their collective gaze fixed on the empty chair at the head. Arthur Sterling stood grimly by the door, an honor guard for a king. Caroline Vance entered last, a ghost in a navy blue suit. She didn't look at anyone. Her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. She chose a seat at the far end of the table, as far away from the head as possible, shrinking into herself. The silence in the room was thick with fear and speculation. Finally, Snoop walked in. He had taken off his hoodie, revealing a simple black t-shirt. He wasn't carrying a tablet, a folder, or any of the usual trappings of corporate power. He just carried himself. He didn't take the CEO's chair at the head of the table. Instead, he walked slowly around the room, his sneakers silent on the plush carpet, looking at the faces of his new employees. His gaze was not accusatory, but appraising, thoughtful. He stopped, leaning back against the glass wall that overlooked the showroom, the silver hypercar gleaming below him like a trophy. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began, his voice calm and filling the room. "For those of you I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, my name is Calvin Broadus. 3 weeks ago, my company became the new owner of this dealership. All of it." A ripple of murmurs went through the room. The rumors had been about a faceless investment group from overseas, not a man who looked like he'd just come from a record store. "I came here today unannounced for a reason," he continued, his eyes sweeping across the room. "I didn't come to look at the inventory or the balance sheets. I can read about those in an email. I came to see the one thing you can't put in a report, the culture. I wanted to know what it felt like to be a customer here. A regular person." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And what I learned, is that we have a problem. We have a problem with our welcome. It seems that here at Prestige, we're selling 6-figure cars, but we're giving out 10-cent judgments for free." He pushed off the wall and began to walk again. "We're in the business of trust. Someone comes in here ready to spend more money than most people make in 5 years. They have to trust you. Trust your knowledge, trust your word, trust that you respect them. Not their bank account. Them. The person. And today, I learned that trust is not our priority. Qualification is." His gaze briefly flicked to Caroline, who flinched as if struck. "I was told that my time was being respected by being sized up, profiled, and politely directed to a used car lot down the street." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had all seen it happen. They had all done it themselves at some point. "Let me ask a question," Snoop said, stopping near the middle of the table. "And I want an honest answer. Raise your hand if you've ever had someone make a judgment about you based on how you look or where you're from. Slowly, tentatively, a hand went up. One of the young mechanics in the back. Then another, a receptionist. Then another, and another. Soon, more than half the hands in the room were in the air. Snoop nodded slowly. Yeah. Me too. It doesn't feel good, does it? It makes you feel small. Makes you feel unwelcome. He then turned his attention to the young salesman who had first approached him. Leo, right? Leo jumped slightly, his eyes wide. Yes, sir. Mr. Broaddus, sir. You came up to me when I walked in, Snoop said, his tone gentle. You smiled. You asked if you could help. You didn't look at my shoes first. Why? Leo swallowed hard, the attention of the entire room on him. Because that's my job, sir. To greet everyone who comes through the door. Everyone is a guest until they say otherwise. Everyone is a guest, Snoop repeated, a genuine smile finally appearing. I like that. That's the whole lesson, right there. Not a potential sale, not a qualified client, not a waste of time. A guest. He looked back at the room. That's the new culture. Starting right now. I don't care if someone walks in here wearing a three-piece suit or flip-flops. They get the same respect. They get the 5-star welcome Arthur mentioned. No exceptions. His expression turned serious again as his gaze finally settled on Caroline. She looked up, bracing herself. Caroline, he said, his voice even. I've read your file. Your numbers are good. You're a sharp manager. You know this business inside and out. But what I saw today tells me you don't know people. You saw a hoodie, and you built a whole story in your head about who I was. A story that was wrong. And that story almost got me kicked out of my own building. He let the silence stretch. I believe in second chances. But I also believe in accountability. So, the floor is yours. I want you to explain to me, and to your whole team, what happened out there today. All eyes in the conference room swiveled to Caroline. The silence was heavy, suffocating. She sat frozen for a moment, the collective gaze of her colleagues feeling like a physical weight. Then, slowly, shakily, she pushed her chair back and rose to her feet. She clasped her hands in front of her, her knuckles white. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse with emotion, stripped of its earlier authority. There is no explanation, she began, her eyes finding Snoop's. Not one that matters, anyway. There are excuses. I could talk about quarterly reports, about pressure from corporate, about 1,000 little stresses that made me hard. That made me see people as numbers on a spreadsheet. But those are just excuses. The truth is, I failed. She took a ragged breath. I failed in my basic duty as a leader and as a person. I looked at you, Mr. Broaddus, and I didn't see a guest. I saw a stereotype. I saw a problem to be managed, and I was arrogant. I was disrespectful, and I was wrong. The culture of this dealership, it starts with me. The bad parts of it, that's my fault. I set that tone. She then turned her gaze to her team. And I apologize to all of you, for setting such a poor example. For fostering an environment where we judge the cover instead of reading the book. She finally looked back at Snoop, tears welling in her eyes. What I did was unacceptable. And I accept the consequences. She stood there, awaiting her fate. The room held its breath. Snoop listened to her every word, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he let the silence sit for a moment before he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. I told you I believe in second chances, Caroline. I also believe that the best person to fix a problem is the one who broke it. He walked towards the head of the table. You can keep your job. On one condition. Your title is no longer general manager. It's now head of guest experience. And your first and only priority for the next 6 months is to personally design and lead a new training program for every dealership in my entire organization. You will build it around Leo's principle, everyone is a guest. You're going to teach everyone what you learned today. A wave of shock, then relief, washed through the room. Caroline stared at him, stunned into silence. He wasn't just giving her a second chance, he was giving her a path to redemption. She could only nod, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. 1 month later, Snoop stood in his new office, the one that used to be Caroline's. He looked down at the showroom floor. Below, a young couple, dressed in jeans and band t-shirts, were looking at a sports car, their faces full of awe. Caroline was with them. She wasn't talking about horsepower or financing. She was laughing with them, sharing a story, her entire demeanor open and warm. She was treating them like guests in her own home. Snoop watched for a moment longer, then turned from the window. A small, satisfied smile touched his lips. The pulse of his new company, he thought, was finally starting to feel right.